Agriculture Minister Jerry Ritz assures the House today that Canada's food supply is safe. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has issued alerts on more than 250 beef products from XL Foods in Alberta after E. coli was found in shipments from the plant. But it was American officials who actually found the contaminated shipments of ground beef on September the 3rd and then warned Canadian officials. The CFA didn't order the recall until September the 16th, so why the lag? The government maintains that it started containing the infected food on the 4th, but why wasn't the public made aware? And why weren't products pulled off shelves immediately? Let's find out. Joining me now in the House of Commons foyer is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Agriculture Minister, Pierre Lemieux. Next to him, NDP Agriculture Critic Malcolm Allen, and the Liberals Agriculture Critic Frank Valerian.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, guys. Now, Pierre, let me start with you. Jerry Ritz assured Canadians that there is no tainted meat on store shelves, never made it to store shelves. But if you listen to the way the thing was set up, it was almost as though the Americans were the ones who had to tell us.
Well, that's not actually what happened, Chris. On September 4th, there were what were called presumptive test results, and the presumptive test results have to be confirmed. It launched a thorough investigation at the plant to determine, is there a problem, and if there is, where is the problem in that plant? And the test results came back on September 13th, and I can just tell you that in terms of Canadians, their health and safety is a top priority for our government, and nobody is more concerned and no one is more on top of this than Minister Ritz.
All right, let me just back up, because I want to make sure that I get the right answer to this question. We knew about this before we were alerted by the Americans.
What I can tell you is that the test results that were received on the 4th of September were considered to be presumptive test results. They were not confirmed. And as you know, and as Canadians know, food safety is a science and it's a process, and it had to be confirmed.
All right, Malcolm, Alan, what do you think about that?
Well, the presumptive test that Mr. Lemieux is talking about was the Americans tell us they had actually caught contaminated food with E. coli and were telling CFIA inspectors. What clearly has happened in this case is the plant was left alone to do its own inspection. The minister is constantly telling us about how much more money is in the system, more inspectors. The reality is they took inspectors out in the last budget. He lost 10% of his budget when it came to what got trimmed last year, and we've lost inspectors. And so what happens now is the plant responsible to do it. The plant didn't make the report, even though it saw variations in its testing procedures over a period of time. That's clearly on the CFIA website. The minister should actually go and visit that website, because that would actually give him more information than he's giving this Parliament. And so really what's happened here is we saw contamination that Americans caught, then told CFIA, who then waited 2 weeks to tell Canadians. That's not good enough. Right. It needs to be about telling Canadians as soon as we know.
I'll get back to Pierre Lemieux in a second, because there's a number of points that have been raised there, but let me bring in Frank Valerian too. I'm just wondering here if part of the problem is not just the number of inspectors, but does the U.S. have more stringent standards that we do in Canada?
It's not more stringent standards necessarily. It's the fact that they caught it on September 3rd, and they have the right application of resources and inspectors for doing this. And what is curious is that it did take 2 weeks. These cuts didn't only cut inspectors, Chris. They cut lab technicians. They cut right across the board. Senior management at CFIA said, you cannot have a 10% cut in your budget and not lose frontline people. But what is particularly interesting, Chris, a news report out from Food Safety First today said that the very program that found this at the American border is being considered to be cut under the Beyond the Border, thinning the border efforts of this government. The very program that caught this problem is now being considered to be cut itself. USDA in 2008 said they needed to strengthen inspection services at the Canadian border, not weaken them. And that is the problem that we have. Yes. Mr. Ritz is trivializing this problem. He's cutting and saying and using typical conservative lines, we are concerned about Canadians' health, when in fact all of his actions show otherwise.
Right. Pierre, a lot of things to respond to there.
Sure, and let me talk about CFIA resources. I'm going to put some numbers on the table. These are fact. Since having been elected in 2006, we have hired more than 700 net new food inspectors. The opposition has voted against that. In the last budget, we put forward $50 million in additional funding for CFIA. Opposition voted against that. In 2011, we put forward $100 million additional dollars for the CFIA. The opposition voted against that. So those are some of the political statements that are worth stating because they are fact. They are in our budgets. We voted on the budgets. This is recorded.
So two things. We didn't have a presumptive test inside the plant. That's the first question. And then what went on for the 2 weeks before we actually hauled those that meat shipment off the
Right. So there are two things that had to go on. The first was that when the presumptive tests were presented, a full plant investigation is required to figure out what is the nature of the problem and where in the plant is the problem or are the problems. It has to be identified. Test results must be confirmed, and that takes time. And after that, we decided to do a recall, a nationwide recall, and meat. These members know this. The meat doesn't move just from XL right to the consumer. It moves through a fairly complex system through different food processors, through retailers. Eventually, it shows up at the consumer. And when you do a recall, you have to understand where was the product shipped to, what products are affected, and you've got to communicate with everyone in that supply chain.
But you still haven't told me why it took 2 weeks to do that.
It didn't take 2 weeks because...
It did.
Well, the recall went on the 14th.
2 weeks.
The tests were confirmed. If I may, Francis, the test results were confirmed on the 13th of September.
Okay, let me bring in the other guys. So this was...
That's important, the 13th of September. But presumptive results on the 4th of September, confirmed results on the 13th of September.
All right,
Malcolm,
Malcolm, you're trying to get in there. Go ahead.
The issues one is that we have a reciprocal agreement with the U.S. They determined it was E. coli in the shipment. That means it's E. coli for us, period. That's the reason we have that reciprocal agreement with the USDA and CFIA. Now, what happened is, and I think one has to look at this, Chris, from perspective, what happens if they're not an exporter? That shipment goes to Canadians, period. Doesn't get caught until when? People get ill? Someone dies? That's the nature of the cuts this government put on the table.
Malcolm,
you want to talk about facts? Now, Pierre, we don't interrupt you. You don't interrupt. So the bottom line was the budget talks about a cut of 481 people out of the CFIA, and that will really affect frontline inspectors, will affect the labs, will affect all the way down the line. If you look at the numbers projected in their 3-year analysis of this budget from this government in CFIA, they lose money. They don't gain money. They lose money. Right, so the reality is that's what's happening with this institution.
I don't have a bit of time. I want to bring
Chris,
Frank Valera for the last word here. What should Canadians take away from this?
An additional factor is this. We just are getting over the BSE crisis. Our food safety is not only an impact on people who are consuming our products in Canada, but it also impacts our ability to get into other countries. It's one thing to open those borders through trade agreements. It's another thing to have them slammed shut when our food safety is in question. And this government is bringing into question our food safety, and I fear the shutting of those borders further.
Okay. I'm going to have to leave it at that, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time. Pierre Lemieux, Malcolm Allen, and Frank Valeria.